the house.
Guys, what you are about to hear and what we're going to talk about this morning is my experience through an addiction. Aaron and Tom and I talked about just the talks and topics that we wanted to take an adventure through. And this was one that Aaron has been walking with me through over the last few years and wanted an opportunity to be able to share this with you. And so I'm going to walk you through this addiction. It's a little bit atypical of an addiction, what you might be experiencing, but I guarantee that there's some in this room who are experiencing it. I was laying horizontal. There I was, it was the middle of the night, and I was staring at the ceiling. And as I was staring there, my mind was like a city car racing through a 6-lane bit of traffic at race car speed. And she was laying right next to me, asleep. And if you were to walk in the bedroom at that moment, and I were to lay out my life situation to you, you would lack sympathy for me. Because what you saw did not match up with what I heard. Because what I hear that you don't hear are these rattling voices that are in my head. If I would have walked down to the local support group, they would have revoked my membership, and they would have just told me, don't come back here and appreciate what you have. And my response would be, well, I appreciate it, but you don't understand. It's an addiction. It's the synapses are desiring something to come in there, and it's not getting it. And when it does get it, it's almost like it calms me down. These voices have almost become a friend for me. We were sitting over what looks like a back porch, but it's hovering over a marsh. And there's beautiful Spartina marsh grass, and the egrets are kind of flying posse over the marsh, and the dolphins they're breathing in an intermittent rhythm out in the water, and we're sitting there. She's sitting right next to me. And if your drone camera would have flown over in that moment, what you would have seen is kind of a Little House on the Prairie moment, marsh style. Everything looks perfect. Everything looks wonderful. But you don't hear the voices. If a Netflix original crew would have come onto the scene, they would have looked at it and gone, not a fit. There's no outward drama. But if they would have just stayed for a little while, they could have seen an inward drama that would have fed series of television shows over and over and over again because of these rattling voices that are relentless. I do have an addiction. It's not metaphorical for me to say that. It's not chemical either. My addiction is not chemical. It's not metaphorical, but it is very real for me. This addiction really is a loyal friend that sticks closer than a brother. In fact, for me, a lot of times, it feels like a loyal friend that sticks closer to Jesus. I'm not trying to diss Jesus, but the reality is that a lot of times it feels closer than He does. And I also realize that men that are willing to display a total reality of what's happening internally, even though you can't see it, are in short supply. So I thought it might be helpful to give you real insight into this addiction. Because for some of you, you may have never been able to name this before. And so maybe this is a moment you get to name it for the first time. And for those of you who don't suffer under this, maybe this is a moment you get to understand those of us who do suffer under it. And you can be a support. I'm addicted to what would be another 4-letter F-bomb, not the one you're used to hearing. When I graduated college, I took an $8 an hour job. This job had absolutely no relation to the fabric that God was building and weaving inside of me when He created me. And looking back, the only redeeming factor that I can find from that 6 months of this job that I hated was that they gave me a uniform to come to work in. So 2 things would always be true for 6 months in that job. Number 1, I would have clean clothes to wear every single day. Number 2, I would never forget my name if only I looked down and to the left. Right? I was miserable. Still looking back, there's no redeeming factor from it. I was miserable. It was robotic and boring and mundane and heartless. It was without teeth. It was lost. It was isolated. I was dry. I was cold. I was dusty. I was dehydrated. I felt anemic. There's a rapper. His name's MF. He said, "Where was the real me? I'm lost and it kills me. I'm paralyzed." I was paralyzed for 6 months. Where was this person out of college that I was getting to know? Why? Why did I take that job? $8 an hour job. Am I above that? No. Am I above hauling logs around a factory? No. You know why I took the job? Health insurance. Seriously, health insurance. The 4-letter F-bomb that I'm addicted to had persuaded me so much that I should run away from the passion, the fabric that God was creating inside of me, and go to a job that had crappy health insurance. Because, what if, right? What if? Even though at 22 I was the healthiest I had ever been in my life, and I was the healthiest that I probably ever would be in my life. And I bought out into a live, all-out risk mitigation. Mitigate everything. Mitigate passion, mitigate growth, mitigate purpose, mitigate progress, mitigate transformation. Let me translate the word mitigate for you. It literally means to run away, like a coward. Run away from passion, growth, purpose, progress, transformation. And that's what I was doing. The 4-letter F-bomb that I'm addicted to eats away at the pig trough of mitigation and is a constant cry to sprint away from things that are meaningful and from things that are challenging and from things that are hard. See, when you're addicted in this way, abundance, the abundance mindset, is risky. When you're addicted in this way, passion is risky. Options are risky. Innovation is risky. Trials are risky. Friendships are risky. This ISI group is risky. So the voices keep rattling. And you know what they say? They say, what if? What if? And on the way in, I took a picture of the sign. I was going to show it to you, but I'm not going to bother. I took a picture of the sign, and all it said was, Jesus might come back. Are you ready? Even the church has got me fearing. The insurance companies do a great job of this. CNN does a great job of this. Bureaucrats do a great job of this. ADT home alarm system does a great job of this. Fear, 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 and it feeds the addiction. And yet, standing in vibrant contrast to what this perceived pillar of fear is the real pillar of faith. Now, when I say the word faith, cerebrally, what your mind does is it just shuts off and goes, yeah, I know, because faith has become cliche for us. And the mind, in the lens of cliche, what it does is it just turns off. And so when I say something that's cliche, another day, another, and your mind fills in the gap, dollar, and it just shuts off. And so I'm even afraid to say the word faith in fear that your mind's going to shut off. If you have a severe, long-standing addiction with the 4-letter F-bomb of fear like I do, then faith becomes belittled because faith is too risky. Faith, the one thing that the human rescue machine, who I know is Jesus, the one thing that He both offers and requires to achieve His greatest art. An addiction to the 4-letter F-bomb neutralizes that faith. It neutralizes the delivery of life. It's when you're overcome by those rattling voices that are going on and on and on and on again. And we see this steel pillar of faith over here. And what we try to do is we try to bust it in the mouth. And we go back to our friend of fear because it's closer than a brother. It's companion. It makes us feel comfortable because that's what we've been living in. Faith, by definition, is to be convinced of something you cannot see. Faith is being totally persuaded in your mind that even though physically you can't see it in front of you, it's there and you're going to start running after it. That's what faith is. It's not there, you can't touch it today, and yet you're totally persuaded that it's true. That business that you're building right now, faith tells you that that thing is real and you're going to keep running after it. Faith tells you that the addiction that you do have, whether it be metaphorical, whether it be chemical, whether it be the 4-letter F-bomb that I suffer under, faith tells you that that addiction will not define you. Faith tells you that life exists beyond what you see right now. Faith that she will come back from what you've done to her. Faith that the hell that you're living in right now will eventually subside because you're just going to keep walking and walking and walking. Faith is a well-balanced, 5-letter meal of hope and encouragement. Faith is a 5-letter, well-balanced meal of hope and encouragement. Fear is a watermelon Jolly Rancher that tastes really sweet right now, has no caloric value, goes away, and it leaves you hungrier than when you came. The F-bomb of fear, when it explodes, it spreads shrapnel. It spreads the shrapnel of cowardice, of insecurity. It spreads the shrapnel of evil and insensitivity and legalism and hate. It's an ugly thing, even though it feels like a friend. I dropped the F-bomb when I was 29, when we decided to plant a church in Texas. And instead of putting in the hard work, making my thighs burn and digging down and creating a vision for that church, I got a piece of advice that just said, hey, use that guy's vision. Why create the wheel? Why recreate the wheel? I dropped the F-bomb when I buy cheap to save a nickel instead of spending well to gain an experience. I drop the F-bomb when I avoid a hard conversation, when I don't speak up to injustice. And I avoid the F-bomb because it feels easier at the time. Frankly, it feels more palatable. I can consume it a whole lot easier than the hard work of faith. The 4-letter F-bomb of fear became for me a dangerous companion, and what I had to do was to learn how to punch it in the mouth. You know Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan till they get punched in the mouth. I realized that these voices, fear has a plan. It's an erratic plan. It's an unrhythmic plan. But until you punch it in the mouth, it's going to work its plan. I had to learn where fear came from. I had to learn that the F-bomb of fear is what also motivates the evil heart of man to go out and slaughter 6 million Jews. It's what also motivates the evil heart of man to sit on a balcony of a hotel in Las Vegas and snipe off 59 people and kill them and injure over 500 people. That same addiction that I'm under is the same addiction that has led men to do those chaotic acts throughout human history. The F-bomb of fear is what motivates the heart of man to hoard, to keep for ourselves, to hold back, to not have the tough conversations, to build and build and build and build and never give, and to push away. Some of you have the same addiction, you've just never named it. The only good that comes from fear is that it fuels more fear, and that's not good. The only winner of fear is fear. And what's crazy about fear is while we're all looking around me or you, and you're listening to the rhythm of fear, you're listening to the tune of fear. To you, it's rhythmic, and to all of us, it's chaos. And we even tell you there's no rhythm to what you're saying. It's when you hear statements like, are you listening to what you're saying? And you're going, yeah, it sounds great. And everybody else around you is going, It sounds rhythmic to you. All of a sudden, in the last 2 to 3 years, something has started to shift in me. This addiction that I didn't even know existed, by the way, until I started coming face to face with the faith mindset and understanding that. This addiction, I started to hear the unrhythmic tones of fear and started to see the rhythmic tones of this faith that I'm talking about. And what it took for me was a lady who I've been married to almost 20 years who was willing to punch it in the mouth with me. And she's willing to call it out because of the faith that she has. And so she started to call that out in me. And you know what she started to tell me? She started to quote this famous quote. It's actually a verse in the Bible. It says, God has not given you a spirit of fear. And so if you have that, you need to understand that is not from the person who created you. It's not. Emphatic. I'm going to give you another cliche, and some of your minds are going to shut off, so I'm going to rephrase it. It says, perfect love cast out all fear. Heard it 1,000,000 times. Here's what it really means. Fully extended and mature love motivates us to slap fear in the face and throw it away. That's what it literally means. If you look at the word, when it says cast out, it means slap and throw away. So how am I starting to make this progress out of this addiction? I don't know exactly. You guys know I'm a roadmap guy. I want a roadmap for everything, and I've not quite been able to build a roadmap about this yet, but I'm getting close. Fear is out of rhythm to everyone but you. You hear the melody when everyone else hears just these scattered tones. But faith, in contrast, is a rhythm that slowly goes over time and is built beat by beat. So what you have, when you've got the rhythm of faith, is you've got a beat. And so it starts with this beat. And you can start to feel the beat. When you hear the unrhythmic chaos of fear, and then all of a sudden you get pulled a little closer to the beat. What is the beat? I've started to think through that as the beat of truth. It's the most famous question I think has ever been asked in human history. It's when a Roman governor of a certain geography stood next to what everybody thought was a lunatic, and he asked 3 words: what is truth? And so over the last 3 years, I've taken this verse, Isaiah 41:13, and it says, "Don't fear, because I, your God, have a firm grip on you, and I am not letting go." I didn't believe it the first time I heard it. I didn't believe it the second time I heard it. I didn't believe it the 57th time I've heard it. But now 3 or 8 or 900 times in, I'm starting to hear the beat. I'm starting to hear the beat. And so you've got this rhythmic bass. It's this slow, mellow, guiding bass line of quiet, wise counsel. And so when you start to rhythmically bring in truth, and then you add on top of that the mellow bass of wise counsel, somebody who's older than you, somebody who's wiser than you, somebody who's spiritually farther along than you, and they begin to help you bust fear in the mouth. Timothy had Paul. Bob Buford had Peter Drucker. I've got Aaron, a guy named Bob Roberts, my dad, John Wigington. These men are given the mellow bass line. And now you're hearing the rhythm, and you're starting to get into a flow. These men have helped me punch fear in the mouth. The third thing I've found is what ISI provides for you, and that's the chords of community. And you start to see that verse of a cord of 3 strands cannot be broken. And so you've got the rhythm of the beat of truth. You've got the overlay of the wise counsel, the mellow rhythm of a man who's older and spiritually farther along with you, and then the chords of a community come in that you guys have started to feel over the last few years because of the ISI. And the chords of that community prove Proverbs 11, without good direction, people lose their way. The more wise counsel you follow, the better your chances. And then once you start to feel it, you start to get a little swagger, you start to get a little bit more confident in what you're doing. And you start to add things to your repertoire. You start to take more risk, because all of a sudden, fear is not as rattling to you anymore. All of a sudden, the voices aren't completely overwhelming you. All of a sudden, with that swagger, you start to realize the same swagger that the owner of peace brought to you. You realize where your hope rests and where you draw life, and your confidence starts to grow. And you begin to embrace the pillar of faith in light of the facade of fear. Fear is out there, but it's a misfit to the rhythm of faith. The two cannot coexist. Where faith exists, fear cannot. And where fear exists, faith cannot. Where faith wins, the music plays on. And it plays louder and louder. And you start to add chords to it. And you start to understand it. But where fear exists, the music stops. And all that rings in your head is the quote that's attributed to David Thoreau, who says, "Most men die of quiet desperation, still with their song inside of them." Speak only fear and you choke out faith. But you start to speak faith and the music plays. I'm not there yet. The addiction's not gone. Relapse is always imminent. But those are the 4 things that I've found to help punch fear in the mouth and start to embrace faith. Thank you.